Hello my dear students, so I am going to continue with the extra questions related to reproductive system of man. Extra question 40. Human reproduction process is completely regulated by hormones that you all know very well. This can be seen in both males and females. As you all know students, there is only one hormone related to the male reproductive system, that is the testosterone. Whereas there are 4 hormones related to the female reproductive system: estrogen, progesterone, luteinizing hormone LH and follicle stimulating hormone FSH. So we look at the questions. Write the hormones related to the female reproductive system and the endocrine gland that secretes them in the table given below. So you all know what endocrine glands are, the gland that produces and secretes hormone. That is what we call as the endocrine gland. So we need to write the hormones and the endocrine gland in the table given below. So I'll start with the one secreted by the ovary. So estrogen secreted by ovary. Ovary is the endocrine gland. Then we have progesterone, again ovary. Then we have luteinizing hormone, what we abbreviate as LH, that is by the pituitary gland. And also we have follicle stimulating hormone. Normally this is abbreviated as FSH, that you all know. That is also by pituitary gland. So those are the hormones related to the female reproductive system. Estrogen and progesterone secreted by ovaries, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone by the pituitary gland. Then the second part of the question, write the hormone related to the male reproductive system and the endocrine gland that secretes it. So I told you all this, testosterone is the only hormone related to the male reproductive system. Testosterone, and that is secreted by the testes. So write the hormone related to the male reproductive system and the endocrine gland that secretes it, testosterone, and by testes. So I am sure students you have answered this correctly. With that, I will move on to the next question. Extra question 41. The first part, what is the importance of uterus? What is the importance of uterus? It is the part of the female reproductive system where the fetus develops after fertilization until childbirth. So here we can say it facilitates the development of the fetus. So then we have the next part of the question. State the 3 zones of uterus. You all know the upper part, it's like a triangle-like shaped structure. The upper part where the fallopian tubes are connected is the fundus. And in the middle we have the body, and below that we have the cervix that is connected to the vagina. So those are the 3 parts or the 3 zones: fundus, body, and cervix. Fundus, body, and cervix. Then we have the third question. Fallopian tubes are connected to the uterus. I mentioned that. To which part are they connected? So that again you all know is fundus, because the fundus expands to form the tubes. Those are the fallopian tubes, and they end with the funnel-like structure which has the finger-like projection, the fimbria. So here the answer to this question, fallopian tubes are connected to the uterus to the fundus. So I am sure students you all wrote all these answers correctly. The importance of uterus is to facilitate the development of the fetus. Then the 3 zones of uterus, fundus, body and cervix. And the fallopian tubes are connected to the fundus of the uterus. With that, I will move on to the next question. Extra question 42. Cross-section of an ovary with various stages of ovum is shown in the diagram below. So when they say ovum, you all know inside the primary follicles only the ovum start to develop. And here you can see it is the Graafian follicle. Inside that you can see the ovum. And here it is the mature Graafian follicle. Then after that, when the Graafian follicle bursts and the ovum gets released, thereafter the follicle undergoes changes and finally fades away. So we'll look at the question. Cross-section of an ovary with various stages of ovum is shown in the diagram. Label the parts A to F. So what is A? Those are the primary follicles. Primary follicles. Primary follicles. Then B. Here this is B, that is the Graafian follicle. Graafian follicle. After that we have C. So it actually develops in this order but the label is from this side. So C you all know is corpus albicans. Corpus albicans. Albicans. Then D, we have the corpus luteum. Then what is E? It is the developing corpus luteum. Developing corpus luteum. And F is the released ovum. Released ovum. So I am sure you were able to label them. A is the primary follicles, then B we have the Graafian follicle, and on the 14th day during ovulation, Graafian follicle bursts. This is the matured Graafian follicle. It bursts and releases the ovum. So this is the released ovum. Then from there, it becomes the developing corpus luteum. Then you get the corpus luteum and finally it is the corpus albicans. That is what we need to write here. A primary follicle, B Graafian follicle, corpus albicans, corpus luteum, E developing corpus luteum and the released ovum. So with that, we'll move on to the next question. That is part 2. Write the hormone that stimulates the development of B. So here you can see B is the Graafian follicle. What is the hormone that stimulates the development of B? It is the follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. So follicle stimulating hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone. FSH. You all know it is secreted by the pituitary gland and it stimulates the development of primary follicle to form the Graafian follicle. Then we have 3. Write the name of the gland that secretes the above hormone. So I just gave the answer. The gland that secretes the above hormone, pituitary gland. Pituitary gland. Then write the name of the phase when development of B occurs. So from A to B, what is the phase? It is the follicular phase. That is where the follicle stimulating hormone stimulates the formation or development of the primary follicle to Graafian follicle. So that is the follicular phase. So here students, although they don't say in what part of the female reproductive system, since it is the ovary that is shown to you, it has to be the phase related to the ovary, follicular phase. Then part 5. What is the hormone secreted by the ovary during the phase you mentioned above? So, you all know, students, during the follicular phase, ovary secretes estrogen because that stimulates changes in the uterus. So, estrogen is secreted by the ovary. Estrogen. Sixth one, write the hormone that stimulates the release of F. F is the released ovum. So, that is released during ovulation. That is stimulated by luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone. That is LH. So again, I'll remind you all, luteinizing hormone, Luteinising or Luteinizing. Both are correct. Luteinizing hormone, LH. Again secreted by the pituitary gland. I'm sure you were able to answer these. Write the hormone that stimulates the development of B, primary follicle to Graafian follicle, that is follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. The name of the gland, that is pituitary, secretes FSH. Then the phase is follicular phase. Then the hormone that is secreted by the ovary during the follicular phase, that is estrogen. And at the same time, ovulation, that is releasing of F, is stimulated by luteinizing hormone, LH. So with that, students, we'll move on to the next slide. Question number 7, again related to the same one. Write the name of the process that releases F. So, that is the process that is known as ovulation. Ovulation. So, on what day of the menstrual cycle does the process you mentioned above occur? So, ovulation occurs on the 14th day of the menstrual cycle. In the ovary, the two phases, follicular phase and the luteal phase, both of them occur for 14 days. So, on the 14th day, that is the first day of the luteal phase, is the ovulation process. You all can remember that. So, here it is day 14, or you can write 14th day, anything is fine as long as you mention that it is the 14th day. What is the hormone secreted by the ovary during the change of E to C? So, here you can see E to C is the change that occurs after ovulation if fertilization does not take place. So, that is the hormone. Here they have asked what is the hormone secreted by the ovary. So, that is going to be progesterone. So, here it will be progesterone. During the follicular phase, it's estrogen. During the luteal phase, it is progesterone. You all have to remember that. Then what is C and what happens to C? What is C? C is corpus albicans. And what happens to it? It fades off. So, here you can say C is corpus albicans. It fades off. So, those are the questions related to the cross-section of the ovary. The process that releases ovum is ovulation. It occurs on the 14th day of the menstrual cycle, and during the luteal phase, it is progesterone. Then, the C is corpus albicans, and that will fade off after some time. So, those are the questions. With that, we'll move on to the next slide. Extra question 44. After implantation, the fetus develops in the uterus with division of cells. So, even though the morula gets implanted, the number of cells are not enough. So, thereafter also there is cell division taking place so that the fetus undergoes several changes and undergoes development. So, the first question. How long does it take for the fetus to develop completely? You all know the answer. Normally we say 10 months, But when we write, we can say 280 days. Normally 7 days is a week and 4 weeks is considered as a month when it comes to these developments. So it's 280 days. 40 weeks of development. 280 days. What is the structure that develops around the fetus after 6 weeks of implantation? So I told you all, after getting implanted after 6 weeks, the embryonic membranes develop. So what is the structure that develops around the fetus? This is important because you all know, students, embryonic membrane, the placenta as well as the umbilical cord, all of them develop. But around the fetus, it is going to be the embryonic membrane. Embryonic membrane. Membranes. What is the function of the above structure? It provides a medium for the fetus to develop, and also it protects the developing fetus. That's the main function, because the embryonic fluid is where the fetus is sunk, but the embryonic membrane protects the fetus. So we can say protects the developing fetus. Developing fetus. The next part. What is the name of the place that the structure you mentioned above connects with the uterine wall? So what is the name of the structure? You all know, students, if we take the uterus, you can remember, if this is the wall of the uterus, the embryonic membrane develops like that, the fetus is in here. This part is what we call as the placenta. You all know that. Placenta. And from the placenta to the fetus, there is the umbilical cord. So here the question is, what is the name of the place that the structure you mentioned above connect with the uterine wall? So this is the placenta. That is what you have to write here. Placenta. So it takes 280 days for the fetus to develop completely. And around the fetus, after 60 weeks of development, there are the embryonic membranes formed. We normally call it the embryonic sac or the water bag. And that protects the developing fetus. And also the embryonic membrane connect to the wall of the uterus. And that part is known as the placenta. From the placenta to the fetus is the umbilical cord, through which the transfer of materials take place. So those are the answers for these questions, students. We'll move on to the next slide. Extra question 45. Umbilical cord is the tissue in placental mammals through which materials are exchanged between the mother and fetus. So some materials go from the mother to the fetus, some come from the fetus to the mother. The questions. Write the materials that are exchanged from the mother to fetus. What are the materials? Nutrients are exchanged, oxygen is exchanged, that is needed by the fetus. But in addition to that, disease-causing agents like virus can be exchanged. You have to include that as well. And I have mentioned to you all, even the alcohol or the medication, some of the drugs that are taken by the mother for medical purposes, for illnesses, that also can be transferred to the fetus. So that is something that is unavoidable. So here, write the materials that are exchanged from the mother to fetus. So we can say nutrients, then oxygen, and disease-causing agents like virus. Then the second one, write the materials that are exchanged from fetus to mother. From fetus to mother, it is the excretory substances as well as carbon dioxide. Excretory substances and carbon dioxide. So those come from the fetus to the mother. State the substance that is not exchanged through the umbilical cord. What is not exchanged? The blood of the mother and the fetus, they never mix. So blood is never exchanged through the umbilical cord. So here we can say blood of mother and fetus. Both these are not exchanged, or the blood of mother and the fetus never mix. So I am sure you were able to write all these answers correctly. These are all very direct questions. You all have to remember these, students. Very important concepts as well. So with that, we'll move on to the next question. Extra question 46. The pair of ovaries release the ova alternately during the menstrual cycle. That also I have explained to you. If this month the right ovary releases the ova, the next month it will be the left ovary that will release the ova. So they function alternately to release the ova. How many days does it take for one menstrual cycle? That you all know. It is a 28-day cycle. So we can say 28 days. That is in a normal, healthy female. But you all know, students, normally it can be a few days more as well. So normally it is 28 days for a healthy female. Write the two stages of changes taking place in the ovary. The two stages of changes in the ovary, what are they? The follicular phase and the luteal phase. Follicular phase and luteal phase. Write the changes occurring in the initial phase. What is the initial phase? It is the follicular phase. So during this follicular phase, what are the changes that take place? One thing, the primary follicle develops into the Graafian follicle. Graafian follicle comes towards the periphery of the ovary, and also during that period, ovary secretes estrogen. So those are the changes taking place. Write the changes occurring in the initial phase. So here we can say primary follicle develops into the Graafian follicle. We can say Graafian follicle is pushed to the periphery of the ovary as it matures. So one is development of primary follicle, then it being pushed towards the periphery, and then ovary secretes the hormone estrogen. So those are the changes taking place in the ovary during the initial phase. I am sure you were able to write these changes correctly. With that, students, I will move on to the next question. Write the hormone that influences the above change. So although ovary secretes estrogen, estrogen stimulates the changes in the uterus. But here it is the follicle stimulating hormone that stimulates the changes during the follicular phase. So that is what we have to write here. Follicle stimulating hormone. That is FSH. So here students, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, in these two you have to have the first letters capital. That is how we get the abbreviation also. Follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. That you have to remember. Then the fifth one. Write the hormone secreted by the ovary during this phase. The hormone that is secreted by the ovary during this phase, that is the estrogen. Estrogen. Okay. Then we have the last question. How many days does it take for this stage? It takes 14 days for this stage to complete. You can remember in the ovary, both the phases take 14 days. So it's a 28-day cycle. First 14 days follicular phase, last 14 days luteal phase. So here the answer is 14 days. So I am sure students you have written these answers correctly. The hormone that influences the changes taking place during the follicular phase, it is the follicle stimulating hormone FSH, and the hormone secreted by ovary during that time, it's estrogen, and also it takes 14 days for that stage. With that, we'll move on to the next slide. Extra question 47. What is the name given to the process occurring on the first day of the luteal phase? First day of the luteal phase. After the Graafian follicle is mature enough, ovulation takes place, releasing the ovum. The Graafian follicle bursts and the ovum is released. So here, what is the name given to the process? So that is ovulation. Then the second one, write the hormone that influences the above changes. What is the hormone? Luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone. Again, here also both the letters L and H have to be capital. So abbreviated as LH. And it is secreted by the pituitary gland. Students, you all might be thinking we have been answering similar questions, similar answers. But the questions are asked in different ways. So I am sure by now you all have a very good idea about the process taking place in the female and male reproductive systems, as well as you know to answer different types of questions. If we look at the third one, write the hormone secreted by the ovary during this phase. What is the hormone secreted by the ovary? It is the progesterone hormone. Progesterone hormone. Again, it is a lipid hormone and also it actually acts on the uterus. Both estrogen and progesterone mainly act on the phases related to the uterus. Then the next part of the question, how many days does it take for this stage? Again, luteal phase is 14 days. Day 14 to day 28. What happens to the Graafian follicle if fertilization does not take place? We have observed that also in the cross-section of ovary. What happens there? After ovulation, the Graafian follicle that becomes the corpus luteum, the developing corpus luteum, that develops into the corpus luteum. Thereafter, it becomes the corpus albicans, and finally the corpus albicans fades off. So that is what happens to the Graafian follicle if fertilization does not take place. So here we can say Graafian follicle develops into corpus luteum after releasing the ovum. Then the corpus luteum becomes corpus albicans. Then the corpus albicans fades off. So those are the changes. So the hormone secreted by ovary during the luteal phase is progesterone. It takes for 14 days. How many days? 14 days. And then the Graafian follicle develops into the corpus luteum after releasing the ovum. Then the corpus luteum becomes corpus albicans, and then the corpus albicans fades off. So those are the changes taking place in the ovary during the second phase of the menstrual cycle, that is the luteal phase. So with that, students, we will move on to the next question or the next slide. Extra question 48. Fertilization takes place in the fallopian tube. That you are very familiar with that now. Ovum enters the fallopian tube through the fimbria, movement of the fimbria. Sperm comes through the vagina into the uterus and then into the fallopian tube, and fertilization takes place in the fallopian tube. What is fertilization? The fusion of the genetic material of the ovum and the sperm, or egg and the sperm. That is what we call as fertilization. The fusion of genetic material of the ovum, or you can say egg, and the sperm is known as fertilization. What happens to the fertilized ovum? What happens to the fertilized ovum? You know that it is known as the zygote. Zygote rolls towards the uterus, and when it is rolling towards the uterus, it undergoes cell division. So, in order to increase the number of cells. And finally, it is called the morula. Morula disintegrates into the wall of the uterus. That is what we call as implantation. So, here what happens to the fertilized ovum? So, he can say fertilized ovum, known as zygote, undergoes cell division. Then it is known as morula. The morula gets implanted in the wall of uterus. Then we have the third question. Write the 3 phases that take place in the uterus if fertilization does not take place. So, normally, if fertilization takes place, the morula gets implanted. Thereafter, the embryonic sac is formed and the embryo or the fetus develops inside the embryonic sac for about 280 days. And after that, it is the childbirth or parturition. But if fertilization does not take place, Then the menstrual cycle continues and there are 3 phases taking place in the uterus. What are they? The menstrual phase, the proliferation phase and the secretory phase. So here menstrual phase, proliferation phase, and the secretory phase. The 3 phases: menstrual phase, proliferation phase and secretory phase. Extra question 49. Menstrual phase is the initial phase of the changes in the uterus. So, we just wrote down all the 3 phases: menstrual phase, proliferation phase and the secretory phase. So, you all know, students, during the menstrual phase, it is the menstrual flow expelling of the wall of the uterus along with blood. So, that is what happens if there is no fertilization and implantation. Thereafter, it is the proliferation phase, and during that phase, the ovary wall rebuilds for the next cycle or expecting another fetus to develop inside it. So, after that, during the secretory phase, all the wall of the uterus becomes active. The glands become active and it becomes secretory, and also there is lot of blood supply and the wall of the uterus becomes larger, it swells up and it is all ready to develop the fetus. So, those are the changes taking place in the uterus. So, now this question is related to the menstrual phase, that is the initial phase of the changes in the uterus during the menstrual cycle. The questions: what hormonal change causes this phase? Yes, what is the change? So, here it is the hormonal change that causes the menstrual flow. What is that? Normally, the progesterone level is high. But when the progesterone level drops in the bloodstream, it leads to the menstrual cycle, that is the first phase, menstrual phase. So, what hormonal change causes this phase? It is the decrease in level of progesterone in blood. That is what you need to write. Decrease in level of progesterone in blood. That causes the menstrual flow. What happens during this phase? I explained that the wall of the uterus is expelled out along with blood. So, the wall of the uterus is expelled out through the vagina, with blood. So, that is the menstrual phase. What is the name given to the above process? The expelling of the wall of the uterus is known as the menstrual flow. So, this is the menstrual flow. Menstrual flow. Then, how many days is the menstrual flow? It's about 4 days. Now, here there are 3 phases in the changes occurring in the uterus. The first phase, menstrual phase, is for about 4 days. So, about 4 days. Why do we say about 4 days? Even this can slightly vary. Normally, in a healthy female, it has to be about 4 days. But sometimes it's more than that, or it can be less than that as well. So, here you all know the hormonal change that causes the menstrual phase is the decrease in level of progesterone in blood, and then during the phase, wall of the uterus is expelled out through the vagina with blood, and also that is known as menstrual flow, and this is for about 4 days. With that, students, we'll move on to the next question. Question number 50, extra question 50. Second phase of the menstrual cycle in the uterus is the proliferation phase. So that's the second phase. Write the hormone that influences the above phase. What is the hormone that influences the proliferation phase? It is the estrogen. You all know, students, during the follicular phase in ovaries, estrogen is produced. So that stimulates the rebuilding of the uterus wall. That is the proliferation phase. So write the hormone that influences the above phase, that is estrogen. Estrogen, a lipid hormone secreted by the ovary. How long is the proliferation phase? It is approximately about 10 days, or we can just say about 10 days. 10 days. So first 4 days menstrual phase, then the next 10 days it is the proliferation phase. What happens during this phase? So here you can say degraded wall of the uterus. Degraded wall of the uterus is rebuilt. So here, students, you all have to remember one thing. When we say the wall is expelled out, it is not the whole uterus that is given out. It is part of the uterus wall that is expelled out. And then that the degraded wall will be rebuilt during the proliferation phase. So there is blood supply given to the wall. So that is the change that takes place during the proliferation phase. So that's why we say proliferation, the building up of the wall, cell division and rebuilding of the degraded uterus wall. With that, the next question, extra question 51. What is the final phase of the changes occurring in the uterus during the menstrual cycle? What is the final phase? It is the secretory phase. Secretory phase. Secretory phase. Then how many days does it take for the above phase? How many days? The last 14 days. So we can say about 14 days. About 14 days. Then the third one. Write the hormone that influences the above phase. What is the hormone that influences the above phase? The last 14 days, it is the luteal phase of the ovary. During that phase, it is the progesterone that is secreted. So, progesterone. Progesterone is the hormone that is secreted by the ovary. It influences the secretory phase that takes place in the uterus, the last 14 days. Write another change taking place in the body of the female during this phase. During this phase, that is the last phase, the secretory phase, the temperature of the body increases slightly. That is the other change. So here, write another change taking place in the body of the female during this phase. The body temperature increases slightly. That is the change. Then we have the fifth question. What happens during this phase? Now already in the previous phase, that is the proliferation phase, the degraded wall of the uterus started rebuilding. So here the wall of the uterus thickens, it gets lot of blood supply and also the glands get activated and it becomes secretory. So those are the changes taking place during the secretory phase. So you can say wall of uterus thickens. The next one is blood supply is increased. Supply is increased. The glands of the uterine wall become activated and it becomes secretory. So that is the secretory phase. So here you can see, students, the final phase is the secretory phase. It occurs for about 14 days and it is influenced by progesterone, and the body temperature increases during the phase slightly, and also during this phase wall of uterus thickens, blood supply is increased and the glands of the uterine wall become activated and it becomes secretory. So now you all can remember, students, you can easily relate all the names of the phases with the changes taking place. Menstrual phase, first 4 days, menstrual flow. Then the second phase, proliferation phase. Normally proliferation refers to increase in number of cells, so the wall is rebuilding. Then it is the secretory phase. The uterus wall becomes secretory because of the activation of the glands and increased blood supply, and also it becomes thick. At the same time, there is increase in temperature. So like that, you can remember the changes taking place in the uterus as well as the ovary during the menstrual cycle. So I am sure you all have answered all these questions correctly. Extra question 52. There are many principal changes taking place during the development of the fetus. So you all know, students, normally after the morula gets implanted, that is after about 7 days. Then the embryonic membranes develop, that is after about 6 weeks, and then the fetus develops inside the embryonic membrane. So there are many changes taking place during the development of the fetus, and we look at it monthly. Like 3rd month the changes, 4th month, 5th month, what are the changes taking place? So that is what they mean by the principal changes taking place during the development of the fetus. And after 9 months, the fetus is completely developed. And after about 280 days altogether, the fetus is ready to come out of the uterus. So that is when childbirth occurs. We look at the questions. Write 2 changes that occur during the 3rd month. What are the changes? The fetus takes human form. Then the nails start to grow in the fetus, both the hands and the legs, and also the head is usually larger when compared to the other parts of the body. In addition to that, in both males and females, the sex organs start to develop during the 3rd month. So those are the principal changes. You need to write only 2 changes. So I will say fetus takes the human form. And also nails start to grow. You can also say that the head is large when compared to other parts of the body, and also in both males and females, the sex organs start to develop. That is during the 3rd month. Then the second question, what is the weight of the fetus in 9 months? What is the weight? 2.5 to 3.5 kilograms. You all know, students, you all have that book where your parents actually mark the weight of y'all. So that is after the child is born, you can mark the weight with time periods to observe whether the child develops healthily. whether the child is growing healthily. You might have discussed that in health as well. The BMI, the growth chart. So there you all know when the baby is born, the normal green region is where you have the normal weight. That is between 2.5 to 3.5 kilograms. So that is the weight of the fetus in 9 months. 2.5 kilogram to 3.5 kilograms. Then the third question, how long does it take for the complete development of the fetus? How long does it take? Normally we say 10 months, that is about 280 days. So here it takes 280 days. Then we have the next question, what is childbirth? What is childbirth? After the fetus develops for about 280 days, it is ready to come out. So the fetus is pushed out of the uterus through the vagina due to the contraction of the muscles of the uterus. So that is known as childbirth or parturition. That is what you need to write here. So here we can say the developed fetus is pushed out of the uterus through the vagina due to the contraction of the muscles of the uterus is known as childbirth or parturition. So if we look at the answer, students, you all know during the 3rd month, the fetus takes a human form and the nails start to grow. Then the weight of the fetus in 9 months is about 2.5 to 3.5 kilograms, and it takes about 280 days for the fetus to completely develop. And after that, the developed fetus is pushed out of the uterus through the vagina due to the contraction of the muscles of the uterus is known as childbirth or parturition. You all know that. So I am sure you would have answered all these questions correctly. I will move on to the last question. Extra question 53. Write 4 sexually transmitted diseases. So you all know, students, sexually transmitted diseases are there, usually transmitted by sexual activities or the secretions from the reproductive organs. Sometimes they are also transmitted by blood transfusion. So those are the diseases that are known as sexually transmitted diseases. You know 4 such diseases. Now there are about 20 such diseases that have been identified. Out of that, there are 4 common diseases. What are they? Gonorrhea, syphilis, herpes and AIDS. AIDS is acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Those are the 4 diseases. So if we write the answers, gonorrhea, then there is syphilis, herpes and acquired immune deficiency syndrome, or what we write as AIDS, AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. So those are the 4 sexually transmitted diseases, the 4 most common diseases. Write the two diseases caused by bacteria. The two diseases are gonorrhea and syphilis. So, we will have to write that. Gonorrhea and syphilis. Then the last one. Write the two diseases caused by virus. What are the two diseases? The other two, herpes and AIDS. So, here herpes, that is a virus, and also AIDS. AIDS, of course, you know the virus, HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, HIV virus. So, herpes and AIDS are caused by virus. Gonorrhea and syphilis are caused by bacteria. So, with that, students, I have come to the end of discussion on this lesson and extra questions. So, we started off the lesson by discussing what reproduction is, the importance of reproduction, that is the continuity of life, and then under that the two main types of reproduction, asexual and sexual reproduction. Thereafter, we discussed the vegetative propagations, both natural and artificial methods of vegetative propagation of plants, then all the different steps involved with the sexual reproduction of plants, and finally reproduction of man. So, with that, I discussed the questions from your textbook as well as a lot of extra questions. So, I am sure, students, with all these discussions, now you are competent enough to answer any type of question related to this lesson.